Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. On the afternoon of January 26th, 1948, a middle-aged man walked into a branch of Japan's Imperial Bank. The branch was located in Shinamachi, an area of Toshima, one of Tokyo's 23 special wards. The man was unassuming, but reportedly carried himself in a dignified manner, and was dressed in a long, loose-fitting coat. On one of the sleeves was an armband, identifying him as a government official. He asked to speak with the person in charge of the bank, and was directed to the deputy manager, 44-year-old Takajiro Yoshida. The unknown man introduced himself to Yoshida as a worker with the local public health unit, and said that he had been directed to come to the bank that afternoon by the United States occupation authorities, who at the time were in charge of the country following the end of the Second World War. The man explained that there had been an outbreak of dysentery in the local area, one that they believed had been caused by the contamination of a nearby well. As it happened, one of the people who was sick from the well had visited the bank that day, so the man needed Yoshida to gather up all of the branch's staff so that they could be inoculated. Yoshida did as he was told, believing he had no reason to doubt what the man was telling him. In fact, it seemed to make a lot of sense, as his boss, the branch manager, had gone home just earlier that day, complaining of stomach problems. Furthermore, situations like this were not all that uncommon at the time given the major damage done to Japan's infrastructure during the war. The destruction had caused ongoing problems with sanitation, particularly in densely populated cities, leading to the spread of a host of diseases. However, unbeknownst to Yoshida, nothing about this man or the situation was what it seemed. And little did he know, he was now at the center of what would become one of the most terrifying and controversial crimes in Japanese history. This is the story of the Teigin incident. Before we get into today's case, we just wanted to offer something of a disclaimer. Because this is an international story and we do not speak or read Japanese, we've had to rely a lot on second-hand English sources, as well as Japanese translations made with crude tools like Google Translate for our research. The English sources we came across in particular seem to contradict each other quite a bit in this case, but we've tried to point out wherever we feel there are important discrepancies. Anyway, we just wanted to put all that out there for the sake of full disclosure. With that out of the way, let's get to the video. When Yoshida got all of those at the bank together, there were 16 people. These consisted of 14 bank employees, including Yoshida himself, as well as 2 family members who were waiting around for a couple of the employees to finish work. The government official told everyone that thankfully, the remedy that they all needed could be taken orally, so it wouldn't take long. He explained that they would each need to take a few drops each of a liquid he had with him in 2 batches. Some accounts state that he mixed the liquid into some tea for everyone to make things easier, while other accounts state that he simply put a small amount for each person into teacups. In either case, all 16 people soon drank the 2 rounds of liquid. Within just a short time, every member of the group began experiencing severe pain. After that, they began dropping to the ground one by one. Finally, after a period of time that some sources estimate was about 30 minutes, one person managed to make it outside to call for help. By the time police arrived at the scene, 10 of the 16 people at the bank were dead. The 6 that were still alive were in critical condition, and 2 more would die after arriving at the hospital. When autopsies were conducted, authorities learned that the liquid that the 16 people had ingested was no medicine. They had all been poisoned with some form of cyanide. A search of the bank, meanwhile, revealed that approximately 160,000 yen in cash was missing, as well as a check for roughly 1/10 of this amount. Strangely, much more money had been left behind, as much as 850,000 yen, according to some reports that we came across. Just a side note, while we usually like to give equivalencies in US dollars when mentioning international currencies, in this case, this turned out to be a bit difficult. A lot of exchange rate and inflation calculators we came across do not go back this far in Japanese currency, with the closest one that we were able to find only going back to 1950. Multiple reports we came across in our research listed the value of the stolen money to be the equivalent of about $2,000 US at the time, though when we did our own calculations using this 1950 exchange rate, we got a much lower amount of about $500. We're honestly not sure what to believe, but we wanted to include something as a reference point. But yeah, take it with a grain of salt. Anyway, back to the case. When the 4 survivors of the crime were interviewed about the mysterious culprit posing as a government official, there was little that they were able to provide. They explained what had happened, and described the man as possibly being between 45 and 50 years old, but beyond that, could offer few other leads. Yoshida, who was reportedly among the survivors, was able to tell police that the man had presented him with a business card. However, he could not remember the name on it, and no such card was found at the scene. Understandably, the terrible crime quickly generated public interest, and became one of the most sensational cases ever to come out of post-war Japan. It became known as the Teigin incident, a name which most of the sources we found state is a contraction of the Japanese for Imperial Bank, Teikoku Ginko. Shortly after the investigation into the Teigin incident began, police learned that the check that had been stolen from the scene had been successfully cashed at another Tokyo bank. Unfortunately, the culprit had provided a false signature and address, and once again, witnesses only reported the same generic details about the suspect being a middle-aged man. Finally, though, investigators would get their first and perhaps best lead when they learned that there had been 2 other incidents similar to what had happened at the Imperial Bank. While there were multiple differing accounts of these incidents, based on the most common information we came across, it appears that the first happened at a bank branch in Tokyo's Shinagawa ward a few months before the Teigin incident, while the second happened roughly a week before in Shinjuku, a ward directly adjacent to Toshima. In both cases, a man referring to himself as a public health official had entered the bank branch in the afternoon, and had said that there was an outbreak of dysentery in the area, and that employees needed to be inoculated. Unfortunately, the information about what happened from here is extremely patchy in even most of the Japanese language sources we came across, with some accounts stating that the employees ingested a mystery liquid but nothing happened, while others claim that the suspect was told by managers that the employees were too busy to participate in the inoculation, after which he left voluntarily. However, what we do know is that no one was injured or killed during these cases, hence why neither of them had been reported in the local papers prior to the Teigin incident. When police discovered this, 2 theories emerged: that either the suspect had used these 2 banks as practice runs before committing the real crime, or that these were genuine attempts to commit earlier robberies, but that they had failed for some unknown reason. One important difference between the 2 earlier bank cases, however, was that unlike in the Teigin incident, authorities were able to recover the business card that the suspect had provided to the bank's managers. One card had the name Jiro Yamaguchi on it, while the other had the name Shigeru Matsui. Much like the signature and address on the stolen check from the Imperial Bank, the name Jiro Yamaguchi proved to be a fake upon further investigation. However, when detectives looked into the name Shigeru Matsui, they discovered that he was a real official from the Ministry of Health and Welfare, in the Department of Disease Prevention. When police questioned Matsui, they learned that he had a solid alibi. However, he was able to provide detectives with 593 business cards, which came from people that he had exchanged his own cards with during the period police were investigating. Just as an aside for anyone not familiar, exchanging business cards is a pretty big deal in Japan, with a number of social rules and conventions governing the proper etiquette. Generally, when people meet for the first time in a business capacity, cards will be exchanged. Matsui told police that though he had exchanged 593 business cards, the one that had been used by the suspect at the Imperial Bank had been from a specific set of only 100 cards. Of these, he still had 8 in his possession. This meant that detectives were left with 92 cards which they needed to try and track down. Over a few weeks and months, police were able to track down 62 of these business cards, thus eliminating their recipients as suspects. A further 22 were deemed to be irrelevant to the investigation, though it's unclear how this determination was made. This reportedly left just 8 possible people. Almost 7 months to the day after the Teigin incident occurred, police announced that they had narrowed down their list of suspects to just one man, 54-year-old Sadamichi Hirasawa. Sadamichi Hirasawa had been born in Tokyo in 1892, though as a young child moved with his parents to the port city of Otaru, located in Hokkaido, the northernmost of Japan's main islands. From an early age, Hirasawa had shown promising talent as a painter, a gift that was reportedly encouraged by his teachers. He would go on to become an award-winning artist, becoming particularly known for his natural landscape paintings of Hokkaido. He had moved back to Tokyo in his 20s after getting married, and would go on to become an art teacher and have several children. When Hirasawa was arrested in connection with the Teigin incident on August 21, 1948, many people couldn't believe it. After all, what could drive such a well-respected, and by all accounts, mild-mannered artist to commit such a terrible crime? Police subsequently laid out their case against him. According to investigators, Hirasawa had received a business card from Shigeru Matsui, but could not produce that card when asked by police. At the time of his arrest, a similar amount of money to what had been stolen from the Imperial Bank was discovered in his possession, but Hirasawa refused to divulge how he had obtained it. Though he said that he had an alibi for the time of the crime, authorities said that they were neither able to confirm or disprove it, meaning that he could have been anywhere. Furthermore, detectives stated that multiple witnesses had identified Hirasawa as the culprit when they were able to see him following his arrest. Finally, and most damning of all, authorities said he had confessed to the crime under questioning. As for a motive, police stated that it was well known that Hirasawa had been experiencing financial difficulties around the time of the crime. Art was a luxury that many couldn't afford in the post-war period, and as a result, Hirasawa's paintings were not selling. His meager salary from teaching had also apparently not been able to keep him afloat, making the money found in his possession at the time of his arrest all the more suspicious in the eyes of investigators. While Hirasawa had indeed provided a written confession to police, he recanted it immediately when the case went to trial. He said that the confession had been coerced and obtained through torture. Hirasawa's defense team further argued that he was suffering from Korsakoff syndrome, a neurological disorder characterized by memory loss, which has a number of causes, such as malnutrition. The defense said that because of the disorder, Hirasawa's confession was not reliable, whether it was coerced or not. Explanations were also offered for several other points of the case against the artist. It was stated that he did not have the business card given to him by Matsui because his wallet had been taken by a pickpocket, and handwriting on the check stolen from the Imperial Bank was found not to be a match to his own. The defense also pointed out that though police said multiple witnesses identified Hirasawa as the culprit, only 2 of the 4 survivors of the actual crime said that they thought it was him. These identifications had also been dubiously made, as instead of being picked out of a lineup or anything, witnesses had just been shown Hirasawa in an interrogation room where he was the only person present. Regardless of the potential problems with the state's case, Hirasawa was convicted of the crime in July of 1950 and sentenced to death. He appealed the decision on the grounds that his confession had been coerced. However, the sentence was upheld by the country's Supreme Court in 1955. They ruled that at the time the confession was legally solid evidence, even if police had beaten it out of him. That being said, once Hirasawa was sent to live on death row, no justice minister ever actually signed his death warrant. Accounts differ as to why this was the case, but several sources we came across allege that it was because officials themselves doubted whether Hirasawa was actually guilty. Despite this, the artist was kept in prison, with appeal after appeal for a retrial dismissed. After decades began to pass, his lawyers tried to get more creative with their tactics, arguing in the 1980s that the statute of limitations had run out for the government to carry out the execution. This again was dismissed. By this time, Hirasawa had gained a number of supporters who were now advocating for his exoneration, and organizations like Amnesty International were petitioning the Japanese government to release him. Hirasawa would ultimately die in a prison hospital in May of 1987 at the age of 95. At the time, he had served almost 40 years behind bars. The struggle to prove Hirasawa's innocence did not end with his death, however. For years afterwards, the effort was led by his adopted son Takahiro Hirasawa. Takahiro had been the biological son of two of Hirasawa's most ardent supporters, and had been legally adopted by the artist in university in order to continue to fight for a retrial. The reason for this is apparently that legal proceedings like this can only be brought by the family members of a person in Japan, and most of Hirasawa's biological family had avoided getting involved in the case due to the social stigma around the crime. Sadly, Takahiro himself would die in the fall of 2013 at the age of just 54. While not officially proven, many attribute his early death to the emotional weight of his constant work on Hirasawa's case, as well as the death of his biological mother the previous year. Takahiro died during the middle of the 19th appeal attempt in Hirasawa's case, which was dismissed after his death. While his attempt to clear his adopted father's name was not successful, Takahiro is credited with tracking down many of Hirasawa's paintings, which were lost in the years following his arrest and conviction. In the years since, Hirasawa's supporters have used these paintings, as well as numerous others he created while in prison, to hold gallery showings, a broader part of their effort to try and restore Hirasawa's image amongst the public and in the art world. As for where the case currently is today, it seems that not many updates have been released in the last few years. The most recent information we could find comes from 2018, when Hirasawa's lawyers were trying for their 20th appeal attempt with the help of supporters and some of Hirasawa's surviving family members. As it stands, though, while many people in Japan remain convinced of the artist's innocence, he is still, at least officially, the culprit behind the infamous and mysterious Teigin incident. Before we finish off, we just wanted to mention a couple of the more interesting theories that we came across while researching the case. The first has to do with the type of cyanide used in the Teigin incident. While authorities at the time alleged that the poison was likely the compound potassium cyanide, multiple researchers have since claimed that the actual poison could have been acetone cyanohydrin. This is primarily because of how long the poison took to act on the victims. The first compound is apparently more fast-acting, while the second is a lot slower. It's alleged that this explains why 6 of the victims managed to hang on until police arrived, and why 4 ultimately survived. The most crucial element to all of this, though, is that Hirasawa almost certainly would not have been able to get his hands on acetone cyanohydrin. Instead, the compound likely only would have been accessible at the time to select former members of the Japanese military. Over the years, this has led some, including famed Japanese crime fiction writer Seicho Matsumoto, to theorize that the real suspect behind the Teigin incident might have been a former member of Unit 731, the infamous covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. It's well known that this unit engaged in horrifying and lethal human experimentation from the late 1930s up until the end of the Second World War, and its members would have had access to a multitude of dangerous chemical agents. We won't dig any further into the history of Unit 731 now, because most of it is outside the scope of its video. But suffice it to say, the topic likely deserves a future video of its own. The second interesting theory we came across has to do with why Hirasawa might have been in possession of the money police found at the time of his arrest. Over the years, many have speculated that Hirasawa may have been doing, let's just say, adult paintings at the time to keep himself afloat financially. The reason he would have not wanted to admit this is because it likely had the potential to ruin his career as an artist at the time. With all that being said, it's difficult to know what to make of the Teigin incident. Was Sadamichi Hirasawa actually responsible for the crime, as police first suspected? Or did the Japanese government doom an innocent man to a life behind bars? And if so, who was really behind the chilling murders? And was robbery their only motivation? After all, the amount of money left behind at the Imperial Bank suggests that there could have been more to the story. Frustratingly, we may never know the answers to these questions for sure. All the same, thanks for watching, and be sure to share your thoughts about the case with us in the comments section below. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a minute to thank our amazing supporters over on Patreon. As many of you are aware, our situation on YouTube always seems to be a bit uncertain, but our patrons help to ensure that we can continue to make content like this long term without having to worry as much about what surprises might be thrown our way. Plus, patrons also get access to 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, head over to patreon.com/crimezone to join. You can also find that link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.